Muchos nos dicen que todo tiempo pasado fue mejor, pero no todo el mundo está de acuerdo. Hay gente que mira hacia el pasado, que recopila información y que nos dice que todo lo contrario, que lo que estamos viviendo hoy es una situación mucho mejor que la que se tuvo en cualquier momento del pasado. De hecho, un pensador escandinavo, que vive en Estocolmo y que ha estudiado este tema, es investigador del Cato Institute de los Estados Unidos, ha publicado un libro que se llama Abierto, historia del progreso humano, es publicado en español por Editorial Deusto de España. Y yo quiero agradecerle a Johan Norberg el que ha aceptado tomar esta llamada. Vamos a hacer la conversación en inglés para que si usted habla ese idioma pueda escucharlo directamente. Vamos a subtitular. Johan Norberg, thank you very much for speaking with us. And please tell us, we've been told so many times that things were better in the past, that the world is getting worse. And what you tell us in your book is something totally different, that we're actually getting better.
That's right. And we have that perception that there must have been some better, more harmonious past. But actually, when historians look at that feeling, it turns out that every generation thought the same. And we can go back all the way to ancient Mesopotamia 5,000 years ago. People said there must have been good old days sometime in the past. That's why we need data. We have to look at statistics. We have to look at real life numbers to understand where we are and where we've come from. And when we do that, what we see is that in these past 30 years, we have reduced many of the world's troubles, extreme poverty, chronic undernourishment, child mortality, and illiteracy faster than in any previous era. And most astonishingly, when it comes to extreme poverty, we've reduced poverty around the world by more than 100,000 people every day for the past 30 years. So it tells you that not everything is doom and gloom and misery.
But I've been reading a lot of articles and a lot of books claiming exactly the opposite. And they claim that inequality has increased and that capitalism has brought havoc throughout the world. And that's the reason where we're actually living worse than we were living in the past. What can you tell us about it?
I think that's a misconception. You can always look at certain places, certain countries where we've seen an increase in inequality, but that's often a byproduct of progress. China 30 years ago was incredibly equal because everybody was equally poor. Nowadays, China is a very unequal country, and that's because lots of people have suddenly been able to attain wealth and get better jobs and higher wages. So it doesn't necessarily mean that inequality means more problems and more poverty. Sometimes it is the opposite. So you have to look at why do people become rich in certain places? And if they do it by implementing new technologies, more goods and services at a cheaper price, it means that they often contribute to more purchasing power and less poverty for people.
We have also been told that globalization has been a bane for the world, something that has deteriorated the situation of the world. But you tell us exactly the opposite. You tell us that globalization has been good. What sort of figures do you have to back up that affirmation?
Well, first of all, what we should do is to look at which places, which countries have been integrating into the global economy, which have become parts of global supply chains and which ones haven't. And then you can see that the least globalized countries are the poorest Latin American countries and the poorest Asian countries and sub-Saharan Africa. Whereas the countries that have made a lot of progress are the ones that have been integrating themselves into trade, into global investments and other things. And it's not strange because if you live in poverty, it's because you lack capabilities, technology, education, access to other markets, access to know-how and technology. And what globalization does is that it brings you more of those opportunities. It gives you access to technologies that have been developed in other places over a longer period. So in a way, globalization, used correctly, means that you get more access to the ideas, the brains, the talents of more people around the world. And that's something that we can look at the thinkers who've looked at economics and of its effects, and people like the professor of international health, Hans Rosling, and others. But we can also look at just indicators of living standards. More globalization equals less poverty and misery.
I've also read that one of the reasons why we should distrust globalization is because it brings to us evils like the pandemic. And in fact, we've been in the midst of a global pandemic for the past couple of years. What are the lessons that we can derive from the pandemic? Does the pandemic teach us that we should sever our links to the rest of the world?
In a way, that is correct. An open world means that bad stuff travels abroad as well, including viruses and bacteria. So that's something that does happen with increased travel and mobility across borders. But that happened before we had any real globalization as well. We had the Black Death killing perhaps a third or half of the European population in the 14th century before we had modern globalization. So it moved anyway, at a slower pace, but it just continued until basically everybody who was vulnerable was killed. The new thing with globalization is that it also gives us the opportunity to fight against pandemics, because we can compare notes. Scientists and entrepreneurs and innovators can learn from one another and come up with things like a new vaccine and have shots in people's arms within a year of even having heard of the virus. And that's a global accomplishment of global cooperation and trade. Just the most used Pfizer BioNTech vaccine, it takes 280 components to produce it from 19 different countries. So in a way, without globalization, we would have had the pandemic and we wouldn't have a way to deal with it and survive.
You've defended globalization and open markets, but not only for merchandise or for financial transactions, also for migration. That isn't very popular today in the US or in most of the developed countries, including Western Europe. But you claim that it's actually good for everyone. Tell us about it.
Yes, it is not popular because people have a hard time adapting to quick changes and to new immigrants. And often they compare the latest immigrants to previous generations of immigrants unfavorably, because the previous generations, we've learned that they contribute to society, that they're like us. They want to work hard, and they want to fit in, and they want to give a good life to their children. And that's the history. If you look at historical societies that have thrived, they are the countries that have been able to rejuvenate themselves, to constantly create new generations of people with new ideas and new energy that gives us new life. So in a way, where societies who've shut their borders, closed them off, they've usually stagnated because they are limited to the way we used to do things back here in our place. And that's not a good recipe for creating more innovation, better scholars, getting more Nobel Prizes, and starting new startups.
I was very interested in your historical comparisons. You point out that trade and open borders were, in fact, quite prevalent in the world, even in prehistoric times, and that we've had times like in ancient Greece, where the countries were relatively open. But then we've had periods in which borders have been closed, and we've had societies that refused to accept anything that came from outside. In fact, Christianity seems to have played a relevant role in that sense during the Middle Ages. Could you tell us about it?
Yes, this is a very strong historical pattern. The great civilizations, the one we now call golden ages, usually have that in common, that they were unusually open relative to other cultures at the time to new ideas to people, to migrants and merchants from other places. And Christianity has thrived historically insofar as it was open, it had a universal idea, it's preached the gospel to different people in various places, and then they can use that energy and that talent from various places as well. But it has also stagnated and strangled development and progress when it has had this idea of purity, that is only for a certain kind of ethnicity, and that other beliefs, they should be shut down. So, for example, when Spain, the Spanish Empire, was at its strongest in the early 16th century, the major mistake was that it forgot that it prospered because it was at the crossroads of different civilizations and learned from ancient Greece and from Muslim northern Africa. And instead it got this idea about purity, and it expelled the Jews, it expelled the Muslims. And the result was that it really shot itself in the foot. It lost lots of intellectual ability and entrepreneurial energy, and it was devastated by other European powers that were stronger at that time.
Open society, as we know, have their enemies. And even some of the countries that we would consider to be the most open in the world have people inside that want to close the borders. We saw that during the administration of Donald Trump. And in fact, you start your book with some anecdotes from that, from the end of that administration. And you point out at the fact that in fact, Donald Trump tried to eviscerate the system of liberties that we have presently in the United States. Can you tell us about it, and what were the dangers and what are the lessons that we've learned?
Yes, this is a very powerful lesson from history, I think. Often when we feel confused about the world, about problems back home, we want to retreat to some sort of imagined better days in the past. And that's really what Donald Trump channeled, this idea that to become strong again, we have to shut borders and make sure that migrants and trade doesn't make their appearance in the United States. And that's a very dangerous temptation, because the thing that made us strong, the thing that made America strong historically, was its openness, its ability to attract the best ideas and people from all around the world. And this Trumpist temptation, it's something that I think that in a way all of us have it within us. This when we feel confused and we fear the world, we want a strong man, someone to point us all in a certain direction, tell us what to do, and shut down all those things that seem chaotic, including even the slow, steady process of negotiation, compromise between different groups with different interests, and we start to yearn for one strong person at the top. The problem, of course, is what happens when that strong person points us in the wrong direction. That doesn't make us strong. Strength only comes from mobilizing the enormous potential of millions of people and entrepreneurs and innovators and workers throughout the economy and the culture.
What do you tell people that tell you, especially young people, and that's surprising, that tell you that in order to go back to a golden age, we have to become more conservative, we have to close our borders, we have to reject migrants, and we have to reject merchandise from other countries? What do you tell them?
I try to tell them that if you really love your country, why do you not think that your country should have access to all the great ideas that are being developed in laboratories or garages in other parts of the world, to all the new goods and technologies that are being produced? Because even if you're the smartest person in the room, your room is very small wherever you are. And to be able to thrive, especially in a rapidly modernizing world with lots of competition, you have to be on the lookout for always better ideas, better technologies, better stuff that can improve what you are doing back home. Because otherwise, sure, you can shut down your society and shut down the borders to try to preserve something, but then slowly and steadily you will lag behind all the others. You will stagnate and become a museum, and that's not the way to make your culture great.
Johan Norberg, thank you very much for taking our call all the way from Stockholm, and thank you for inviting us to read your new book in Spanish, Abierto, historia del progreso humano. It's a book that has been published by Editorial Deusto in Spanish. Thank you very much, Johan.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Para usted, amigo televidente que hace posible este programa, yo se lo agradezco también. Esto es todo por hoy, pero no se le olvide. Nos vemos la próxima.